All right. Well, it is shortly after 11 o'clock, at least where we are. I know some of you are joining us from around the world, so welcome, and we are going to begin. First, just some introductions. My name is Helen Schroeder. I'm sure you've seen my email pop up or my name pop up in some of your emails over the last couple of weeks. I'm the marketing coordinator at Sigma Assessment Systems, and I will be co-facilitating your webinar today with my colleague, Glenn Harrison. For those of you who are new to Sigma, we are a professional services firm that offers talent development, succession planning, and a lot of psychological assessments. And this is mostly for organizations looking to build their internal talent pools. Sigma has been in business for over 50 years, so as a company, we have a lot of experience. And today we are here to talk to you about leadership assessments and team building. So we have about 60 minutes together. For the first 45 minutes or so, Glenn will walk you through the content of the webinar to introduce leadership assessments and team building, what they are, why they matter. As we go, feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your webinar to submit questions. We can pause throughout the presentation to answer those, and we can also collect them for the end. We'll leave about 15 minutes to go through those questions and also answer any new questions that you have that come up live. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share the recording with you in a follow-up email tomorrow. It'll be live for about a month, so hopefully that will give you enough time to refer back to it and take anything that you need to from the slides that are being shared here. We won't be emailing out the slide deck itself. And now, without further ado, let me introduce you to my colleague, Glenn, so that you know what an incredible facilitator we have with us today. Glenn is an organizational transformation consultant and succession planning expert. Over the course of his career, he's worked with 1/3 of Fortune 500 companies and every level of the government in Canada and the United States. Having worked with numerous clients to build robust succession plans from the ground up, Glenn has extensive experience in the application of pretty much every one of Sigma's products and services to help organizations realize their people potential. So you are in very good hands. And I'll pass it off to Glenn now to start walking you through the webinar.
Thanks so much, Helen, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to spend a few minutes with us today. So as Helen said, we're going to talk about using leadership assessments for team building. In the introduction, you heard the word succession a lot of times. Just as an aside, we do a fair bit of succession planning here, and depending on what terminology you use, you think, how does leadership assessments or team building relate to that? We really look at everything from a talent perspective as rolling up to succession. So why are we doing these things, and so forth. So I might touch on some succession things as we go through this, but our main focus today is how to use assessments, specifically leadership assessments in this case, but I think a lot of the same themes will be relevant as you go through this for team building. So just to give you a little agenda of what you're in for today, the first little part, just really an introduction to team building. Some of this may be old hat to you, but we do want to go through what team building is, why strong teams are important, and I think the increasing need for team building is really important. And then finally, so why using assessments for team building? How is that different? What are the advantages of that? A little bit as an aside, what I'll mention a few times as we go through this session today is what we've really tried to do at Sigma for all of our tools and products, and Helen will touch upon this and I will touch upon this at the end of the session, is we really believe our job is making our clients' lives easier. And to that end, we do things like these lunch and learns or workshops. The things that I'll be talking about today are from a really great and detailed guide that our team has developed that's available for free on our website. So I'll mention that a few times. Still probably worthwhile taking notes in terms of some themes, but understanding that there's a longer version of this where we have all the tools, the slides, everything that you can access, and we will send that out after the session. So to that end, everything we do, certainly, I think we take a similar approach to many organizations, but I think the overarching theme of what we try to do is make things practical and make our clients' lives easier. And to that end, as I said, we'll talk a little bit about team building at the start of it. Most of the session today will be being very specific about what does an implementation of an assessment-driven team building exercise look like. And we'll go through basically the three parts, kind of independent activity, 2-hour group session and that ongoing development. And it's really about giving you the tools, whether there are tools or using the themes, or just, I think there's, as I said, there's a lot of things that I think you can take from this, whether you use our assessment and whether you use our tools or approach. So we'll go through that on a very practical level, maybe a little more detailed than some of you would like, but we really want to try to convey the experience that we've gained with our clients over the years and just help you, help learn from things that, help learn from things that we've already done over the last few decades. And then finally, we'll just introduce you to some resources and some things out there that are really, hopefully, going to help you make your life easier and help you do your job a little better. So in that mind, from that context, we'll jump right into sort of what is team building. And, I think everybody sort of has a sense of this already. Team building just in itself is really any process, right, that helps build that team, helps get us to know each other better, and really build those relationships between each other. And it really can be anything. I think more, for whatever reason, when I think of team building, I think of the kind of retreat where we go off and they wake us up at 5 o'clock in the morning and we have to find a way to use 2x4s to make our way across a ravine. Maybe a little too extreme, but retreats, workshops, really anything that allows us to come together with a specific goal in mind, and build those relationships. And I would say, team building can be used and applied to many different things. I'm sure maybe even many of you on this call have been in team building workshops or different types of team building things. But as I said, it can really be anything. I think what we try to get across in the session today, though, is to make them meaningful. I'm not sure kind of the composition of the group on the call. I assume, maybe rightly or wrongly, that many of you from the, sort of the talent development or the HR world. And I do think that sort of over the years, these team building workshops have become something that, if I'm being honest, that employees see as more of a burden than something that's going to be a benefit moving forward, right? And I call it sort of the eye roll. Hey, we get to get together for the weekend, and I'll go up to a cottage and spend time together, and we'll force you into a room, and at the end of it, we'll all be a better team. So I think people have different connotations of what team building is. Some of our clients that will use the approach that we'll talk about don't necessarily call it team building. Some do, some don't. But again, just in terms of what it is, I don't think I need to spend too much time on that. Many of you know what that is. But really, anything that gets us together collectively, if you could argue that if we have to travel on a business trip together and there's 3 or 4 of us, that's, while it's not formalized, that's an opportunity. And really some of the colleagues that I've worked with, some of the best, team building experience that I've had are more informal, traveling, having dinner together, that sort of thing. But I think what we're more curious about, certainly with this group, is being very formal and intentional about what we're trying to get out of the opportunity. And I think Helen mentioned it as well. As we go through this, I think it'll likely be more interesting for myself and more interesting for everyone on the call. If you have questions, use that Q&A and feel free to ask any questions as we go through this. I think it breaks it up, gives everyone a break from me, which is never a bad thing. And likely if you're thinking of something or if you have a question, I'm sure someone else on the call does as well. So, why are strong teams important? This shouldn't be a huge shock to anyone, but the Stanford study that we list here, we'll spend more time on difficult tasks. I always say kind of who we work with in some cases is almost at least as important and sometimes more important than actually what we're doing or who we're working for. So if you can appreciate jobs that hopefully that you all have now, or maybe jobs that you've had in the past, if you have those relationships with folks already, it does, forget about the research for a minute, but it just tends to make things easier. In stressful situations, you have each other's support. And dare I say, things can be more fun if you have those relationships already, and everybody sort of forms their role in the team. And it's something that's sustainable. The nice thing is anything we do from a team building perspective, if done right, and talking about some of the ongoing work that we'll talk about later in the session, when done right, it's something, it's almost like saving money. You put it in the bank, it will gain interest, and it's something that you can continue to build on. So certainly, as you do more and more of this, it's absolutely sustainable. Any of the work that you do is never lost. And the more that you put into it, obviously, the more that you're going to get out. So, if there are specific large projects, things like that, when it's a cohesive team that works well together, that actually enjoys being around each other, real simple things, but not always the case. And some of you may not be in situations where that is the case. But I think it helps us get more done. It also, the better the relationship is, the more likelihood that I'm going to give constructive feedback, that I'm going to tell you what my expectations are. It just, as you can all appreciate, it just makes everything much, much easier when there's that cohesive team. So regardless of what all the studies say, I think that we've all been on teams in the past, and we just know that it's easier when we're all working together. And as I said, really what I would sum up this slide is, who you work with is certainly a lot more important than who you're working for and what specifically that you're doing. So the need for team building, and this shouldn't come as much of a surprise. Team building has always been important. I would say certainly the advent of, or the increasing proportion of people working from home, working remotely. I don't think that we've ever been at a time in history where, a significant amount, and I'm curious with those on the call, if that's still the case, where a significant amount of the workforce is working remotely. And as you can appreciate, when you don't have those opportunities, when you walk in the morning to work, the little chit chat, how was your weekend? We're having to do a lot of that through Zoom and almost forced team building and forced interaction. So I think just the nature of more people being remote, it's infinitely more important than it ever has been. And I can just think, specifically an example. We have a new consultant actually starting on Monday, and she happens to be in Denver, and we're all, we're basically a few thousand miles away from her. So imagine that from the perspective of the individual. I'm starting a job with a new organization. I see them on Zoom. There's not necessarily an opportunity to meet with them in person. Imagine how difficult that is on the individual level. But I also think even from the organizational level and from the group level, it's just, it will just take longer for that dynamic and that cohesiveness to happen. So, but, team building is infinitely more important because of that. And again, just because people work together doesn't mean that they're a team. Many of you have probably heard before, just sort of those group norms, the folks that you've been working with for a long time, you probably have a certain dynamic, maybe a little more of a casual or informal way of talking with each other and so forth. Somebody coming in new, or when you're with that larger team, those things really have to be established, and things that we can do to sort of speed that up. And help people understand what their specific roles are, what the expected group norms are. And I'm sure many of you, there's probably teams that you work on where things are very business-like, very practical and straightforward. Others are a little more looser. And I think giving opportunities just help people find their fit and find that dynamic, I think, is really important. And some teams just sort of fit. But I think even those do require something intentional, and something to, just expecting it to happen is certainly not enough. And I think there's no better example when you think of, for any of you, and I have one of my colleagues that just loves, and I say that sarcastically because she doesn't love when I bring up sports analogies, but we're talking about teams, and I think there's a real natural fit for a sports analogy. And if you look back historically, there's been many cases where a team, quote unquote, of superstars that doesn't necessarily fit on paper are certainly better than the other team will lose. And that team that's really maybe a bunch of unsung heroes that fits and has that cohesiveness will win. And more times than not, that's the case. So, we say in here, kind of 5 great employees that don't work well together are probably, and I mean, we use the word bad, but certainly I think if there are 5 really bad employees, even if they work well as a team, they're probably working well as a team to maybe embezzle money from the company or something like that. So, five maybe let's just say good employees who work well as a team are always going to be better and more, being able to add more value to the company than just a bunch of individuals. So as I said, team building, it is more difficult, but it's more important to do just in the context of remote work. I also think, what we've seen is, and maybe I'm giving my age a little bit, but, several decades ago, someone would come into an organization, stay for a long time. That is certainly over the years has become not the norm. So typically for any organization you're with, you have people coming in and out of the team at a pretty frequent basis. So that team building is even all the different things that are happening, in 2023. Team building has always been important. I just think it's infinitely more important just because of the environment that we're in. So I don't think any of those previous slides that we've pushed back the frontiers of what team building is in the first little part of this, but just to give you some context, what I want to get into, and specifically what's driving this session, is using assessments as a way to facilitate that team building. So I'll talk a little bit about assessments. Many of you are probably familiar with different types of assessments. I think from a team building perspective, especially if the majority of the group is made up of folks from the talent development world or HR world, many of you are probably familiar with DISC assessments, the MBTI or Myers-Briggs assessment. Those are actually used fairly heavily in teams. And I think the positive things about assessments like that are that everybody, we do an assessment, everybody gets, a really good report, and it's lots of really positive things. So it's a positive and kind of rewarding experience for everybody. So I think that they've become really popular. We'll talk about, we'll be using our assessment as kind of the foundation to tell you how to use an assessment. But we've taken a little bit different approach and really having a quality measure of competencies like conflict management and communication and so forth. But assessments can be several different categories. I would say typically what works best from the team building environment would be personality assessments, leadership assessments that we'll talk about, and things like that. So why use assessments for team building? I talked about it a little bit in the past. I think we want to be really, really intentional, and we're forced to be really intentional about team building and not just sort of throwing everybody in a room and expecting them to be friends. So I think if we use assessments properly, we have an opportunity to create some really meaningful and intentional experience. And the development opportunities that come with it can be the foundation of team building. It essentially gives you a bit of a 2-for-1. So we have an opportunity where we can bring people together for an intentional and meaningful reason. And at the same time, we're putting them in a position where they're actually getting a development opportunity. So folks are learning, they're growing, and by the way, we're also in a team building environment. So the team building doesn't have to be the star. The assessments can really be the facilitator and drive things. The other piece too, and for those of you again that are in the talent world, what we've found, and especially in the last couple of years, people have always been busy. I think the intensity of how busy people are for a variety of different reasons, in terms of what's happening in the economy and the employment market. I always tell our clients when they're delivering a team building initiative, a succession planning initiatives, is remember, first and foremost, you are competing with people's time. The organization will be paying the money. Everyone that's a part of this are actually paying with their time. So you want to make sure if you're asking for 2 hours of my time, a half a day of my time, an hour of my time, you really want to make sure that person's going to walk out of the room or walk out of the session and say, that was worth my time, because we all know they're going to come back to 50 or 60 emails. and more work. So you really want to see them as paying with their time and make sure that we're really sensitive and respectful of that time. So if we're going to get them together, make sure that it's something meaningful. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, and certainly, but I know in my history and certainly before Sigma, I can think of team building workshops that, were sort of nice on paper, but when they boiled down, it really felt more about getting in a circle, holding hands, and singing Kumbaya. And again, that is, I am being, extreme intentionally here. And it may have been fun, that we sort of enjoyed each other's time, hopefully. But again, at the end of this, whether you do what we've suggested here or any initiative you're doing from a talent perspective, is can you communicate what value are people getting for the time that they're giving to you? And if you can't answer that clearly, you should probably look for something else, because I think what that does, if we take a step back and more on a high level, anything that we do, we want to make sure that if people are paying with their time, the organization is paying with their value, with their time, that we're giving them value, that we're doing something for a reason and not just doing it because somebody said, hey, we should really do team building and I want to get a check mark. And interestingly enough, I'd say, and it still happens. Typically, if we're talking about what does a typical client look like for this, is I will get a call on a Wednesday, and the person will be on the phone and say, my boss said we need to get our team together. We need to do a team building workshop, and I have no idea what to do. That's typically how these things go. I think our clients are becoming a little more and more intentional, and a little more intentional, and as I said, sensitive about giving some thought to what that is. But again, historically, a lot of the times is, I need to do something. It has to be team building. How can you help me? And so hopefully you get a few things out of this session, but one of the things from this session is just to have a really intentional approach, so that you know why you're doing it, what's in it for each of the individuals that's going to be in that room, and that there's a way to sort of measure success. So as I said, whether it's this or something else, always remember you're competing with people's time. What are you giving them for their time? And can you communicate that value? Because that's both going to be important for lack of a better reason, selling them on this. So why should they come into this with the right attitude and be engaged? But I also think is, once you do this, everything you do, especially in the talent arena, everything you do is essentially, again, getting credit for that next initiative that you're doing. So if you do something sort of, well-intentioned, but not well thought through, and people walk out of that and say that's a waste of time, it's going to make it much more difficult for you to do anything in the future. And as I said, especially in the talent arena, you're always, you're always trying out, or you're always trying to prove your value. So I think it's really important, and I'd say probably that's the argument almost more than anything else for layering assessments, because we're actually doing something, and we can actually say this is what we expect to get out of the session, and we can circle back and measure whether people got that value or not. Any questions so far? I'll just I don't see any numbers in that Q&A. It's okay if it's not. But I'll just give you a little bit of break from my voice before we move along. So then just getting into the use assessments, the first part was really more high level. What's team building? Why to use assessments? Why it's all important? I think, as I said, I think most of you would agree with everything up to that point. Now what we want to get into is actually real basics, maybe not the right word, real practical approach for how do we take an assessment, build it into some sort of a program or initiative, and use it to build our teams and get something out of it. So we're going to go through basically a practical approach. I wouldn't say this is how all of our clients do it. I'd say it's a pretty consistent approach. And I think, as I said, we're going to talk about our leadership skills profile. It's easily one of our most popular leadership assessments. I don't want you to say, oh, well, this is just, an ad for their LSP and there's no value in here. What I'm going to try to do as I go through this is talk about really the major themes and takeaways that I think you can apply to any assessment. But obviously, I think it's just more helpful if we use a specific assessment. And I also think there's some specific tools that are part of our LSP that really serve well and really set a nice foundation for team building. So at a high level, and again, for generally speaking, what we really like to do from a team building workshop is, and this is sort of the general theme, have some sort of independent activity. What that does is allow you to introduce what you're doing, why you're doing it, hopefully get people a little bit excited and they see this as an opportunity. So, there should be something meaningful that you're doing in that independent activity. In this case, we will ask them to do the assessment. I'll talk about that in a minute. But it also, I would argue that it's almost a little mini commercial. What you're trying to do is generate energy and generate engagement so that when they show up to the actual session, that they're excited and engaged and they want to be there. So the independent activity is there's usually something practical and functional that we need to do, but I think it's a really important touch point that we can use to sell the value of this before we ever get everybody collectively together. The session itself, I think, and as we go through this can be, we've taken the approach, we've taken kind of a best practice, and this is where you would like to be in terms of having these 3 specific steps. I would say that, some of our clients will do the independent activity and just the group session. But what if there's the time and there's the appetite, I think, and we'll talk that you can get much, much more if you look at this as an overall longer term commitment and an opportunity to have several touch points with the people in the session. So the group session, we'll talk about specifics around that. The ongoing development, we'll talk about that as at a high level. But just to, for the sake of time and getting this all into an hour, we won't go too much into the ongoing development, but I'll talk about it at a high level. And I've talked about this already. So the first thing is the independent activity is actually pretty simple. Kind of on your own time, take the assessment. I'll talk about the communication and so forth. The group session is really what we'll spend most time on today. It's sort of setting that up. And then in terms of the ongoing development, we'll touch upon kind of the high level and the themes of it. But for specific tools, we'll make available the full download guide for this so that you can dig into that a little bit more. So the independent activity, again, as I said, it's meant to give you a head start. It's also a really important touch point where you can communicate, what we need you to do, why you're doing it, etc. And there's certainly things that you can do to hopefully create a little bit of an excitement. For this case, it's to take the LSP. If you're using another assessment, you can just plug that in there. Just a few, and this is maybe obvious, but not to leave anything obvious because we've been through this where people haven't done the obvious. So for the facilitator, if you're the individual that's driving this, what I would recommend is, regardless of what assessment that you're using, make sure that you take it first and know what the experience is going to be like. From the basic is, do I have to set up an account? Do I have to sign in? All that kind of basic stuff, because what you want to be doing is, when you send out the email to everyone and says, hey, we're doing this great, this great workshop, can you take the assessment? You don't want there to be any surprises. So make sure you understand the entire experience from getting the link to doing the assessment and what the assessment looks like. And I think that will, and I would almost argue, if you have the opportunity and if you have colleagues, it might seem, it might seem like overkill, but if you have a few colleagues on your team, do a little bit of a dry run. So do the email to them as if they were participants in the session, have them take the assessment, and they will probably pick up on potential questions that you weren't ready for. And if there are some obvious things, you can actually put that in the initial email. So again, some basic stuff, but just make sure you understand the entire experience from the user's perspective, and then you can identify any obvious questions, maybe some pitfalls. At a very basic level, some of our clients are in the military and in some pretty high level security from an email perspective. So a very simple thing is, trying to send an email internal, if we're sending the email and it doesn't get through and you wonder why nobody's doing their assessments, whether it got caught up in spam or a firewall or something. So those little things, because you want it to go as smooth as possible. As I said, in the talent world, every touch point, you want to make sure that you've sort of been proactive about any potential questions, because for a lot of times, this might be the first development opportunity that an individual's had with the organization. It might be their first interaction with you. So you just doing a dry run, it can just help eliminate any of those little minor things that can really have an impact on the confidence in the process itself. So I won't beat that to death anymore. So what you'll see when you download the guide is we do have a sample template. I always say make it your own, but the key piece when you send that email is, what are we doing? What's sort of expected of me? Why are we doing it? And the really important thing, regardless of the assessment that you're using, it would be, and I was going to highlight it, but forgot I was in a slideshow, is anytime you use an assessment, it's important to understand what's going to be done with the report or what's going to be done with the data. Because this would fall under the development umbrella, typically the individual would own the report and would own the data, and we would really highly suggest that, because I think, as you can appreciate, it just gives a much more open vibe, for lack of a better description, for folks. But that being said, anytime I have to take an assessment with my organization is asking me to take this leadership assessment. As you can appreciate, certain people, alarm bells will go off and go, oh, what if my leader sees this? What if I don't do well on the assessment? So what you want to do is anything that you can do to take out that anxiety from it and be very clear. And as I said, for something like this, we would very strongly recommend the employee owns the data and that the data would not be seen by anybody within the organization. Make that very, very clear, so that it just eliminates that anxiety, allows them to do the assessment with an open mind. This is for development purposes, and come into it with looking at this as an opportunity versus some sort of evaluative an evaluative thing that the company is doing. So we send the links to folks, they do the assessment, and then we get into the group session. And I won't, I've talked about some sort of little things from a logistics perspective. I'm not going to go into, how to set up the room or anything like that. I'm sure many of you have done that before. Certain things are obviously important. We've probably, anybody has done a presentation before we've all had the struggle with the projector when there's 30 people in a room and the projector doesn't seem to want to work with your laptop, but just be prepared, and so forth. So we've mentioned, and we're sort of giving you an opportunity for a 2-hour group session. The reason for that is, as I'm sure everybody on this call can appreciate, is it's really tough to get in people's calendars. And I always say, if you download this guide, I hope we've done a really good job of making this easy for you and taking away all the heavy lifting, which we haven't figured out a way yet is an easy way to get on people's calendars. If you have 20 people being in this session and you're trying to do this for 2 weeks from now, inevitably someone will be on holidays. That calendar piece is impossible. So I would say, if you haven't done anything like this before in the past, try to limit the ask early on. And that's why 2 hours is reasonable. You could probably squeeze this into a shorter period of time, but if you haven't done this before, try to make the ask a bit smaller. If it is something that you've done before and you think there is a really good appetite for this, a lot of the things that we'll talk about today can be easily turned in. Several of the exercises could be turned into a session in of itself. So the tools that we provided you can be done in a pretty efficient format, but you can expand them out to really fill as much time as you need. But as I said, if it's something, if there's a big appetite and people are really anxious to do it, maybe you can extend this a little bit more. I would always say when you're doing something, especially if it's a talent initiative, ask for a little, make sure it's awesome. And then people are going to be a lot more excited moving forward, and maybe they'll give you 3 hours next time. So the old ask for little, deliver big, I think is really important in a case like this. So we'll talk about how to fit this, and it's certainly a lot to do in 2 hours, but we want to be reasonable about what our ask is from folks. So nothing super crazy here. Kind of start with an icebreaker discussion just to get people rolling. And we're going to focus this morning mostly on some of the activities. And this is something that comes along with the leadership skills profile. That's why we love it, but we're obviously, just a tiny bit biased as well. I think that the exercises themselves work really well, regardless of what assessment that you're using. But at a minimum, I think that there's some themes that you can take from them, again, regardless of what exercise that you're using. And I'm sure there's probably some of our clients that will use the exercises independent of an assessment, but we really believe in the value of having that unique perspective that we can, that we can incorporate into this. And what we'll talk about it ongoing, but we'll talk about how to wrap it up nicely and hopefully set up some time for some more touch points and some longer term development conversations moving forward. So just a quick agenda, and obviously make this your own, the icebreaker, focus activities, and we'll give you some discussion points. But I'm going to jump right in to give you a sense for, and the icebreaker part, everybody probably has their things, has their own things to go to. I would always say, and because I've been in this industry for a lot longer than I care to share, because then you guys will be able to figure out my age if you weren't already. But there's certain kind of icebreaker things that we've all kind of been there, done that. And anytime I work with a client, I want anything that we do to stand out. I don't want it to be like everything else that we already did. So even through those icebreakers, I mean, there's certain things that that have worked in the past, introductions and so forth. But for me, and again, this is personal preference, but I like to get right into it. Again, going back to, people are so protective of their time. You will lose them really quickly unless you get into the meat of things really quick. So I would get into results relatively quickly. And Helen's putting up some links just in terms of what a sample report of this would look like. And there's a lot that we can do with the assessment, but just getting an idea, and we want it to be positive. I mean, we don't want to start off and say, hey, what was your lowest score? What are you really bad at? That's not super exciting. And I don't think a lot of people are going to share, but just a little more high level, right? What results surprised you? What results reinforced what you already knew? And kind of something, what did you get from the report that you might have appreciated or learned that you didn't know before? So make it, especially early on, because people have just probably sat down, really make it easy for people to share, right? The bar is low. The idea is just to get people warmed up, so to speak. I guess that might be why it's called an icebreaker.
Hey, Glenn, we have a question here on icebreakers. Do you have any recommendations for specific icebreakers that have worked well in the past from your experience with clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as I said, I personally, for me, I actually like to get right into, and I'll just go previous here. I actually like to get right into this, and we say, icebreakers, and then this. When I've done the session in the past, I jump right into this. I think that I think we have to, anything that we do like this, we really want to think of it as we need to get people engaged right away. I always assume, and this might sound terrible, but I've been here, I always assume that people are there because their leader told them to be. And they have their phone and they have all these commitments and they're thinking of the emails that we have to get to. So get into things quickly. I would say do introductions and jump in quick. But there's certainly there's certainly different things. But as I said, anytime I'm in sessions, and part of it is probably just probably just a bit of a kind of a hangover and kind of baggage of previous companies and projects that I've been with, but everything's been done. And I think it's so hard to have this cool, exciting icebreaker that's going to get people excited. It just gets them into, this is just like we've already been. So I say get into the meat of things quickly. Get people quickly, because you will lose them, and it's really hard to pull them back. So sorry to not be a little more help with that, but as I said, I really like to dig into why we're there right off the bat. Because the other thing is, an icebreaker can easily take 10, 15 minutes. And it's about getting the most out of it, especially if you scheduled for 2 hours. Let's get the most out of this, and let's make sure that people said that was really a valuable use of my time. Don't waste anything unless it actually absolutely contributes to the session. So there's a couple exercises, and as I said, these are specific exercises and tools that go along with the leadership skills profile. However, the general theme, I think, that you can use for any assessment. Any assessment, most assessments typically are a lot of information, can sometimes be overwhelming for folks. And the spirit of the exercise that we take them through is we want to take all this information and we want to filter it down to something that's meaningful and something that they can work on. So this exercise itself is actually very simple. We just take their competencies, their focus competencies, and I'll just show it right here. So we have their focus that's shaded in blue, but essentially we take, essentially their 10 competencies, and it's really about validating. And I would say, I really like this point, just as an aside, I don't come from the psychological testing world. So I think I always bring a bit of a healthy skepticism into these things. And I think what this does is helps them filter down their results, but it also realizes that any assessment, even ours, and we put a great deal, we've put 5+ decades into our assessments, and we put a great deal into the accuracy of them. There's no such thing as an assessment that's 100% right 100% of the time. And I think going through a process where we actually validate the results and take something like an assessment that people see as, have different perspectives as what it is, and we bring it into the real world. I think that this does that by saying what the report says and then validating it and having them think about, would my colleague agree with this? Would my leaders agree with this? And can I think of experiences that would support this as a strength or support this as a development opportunity? And then I think the nice thing about that is you have them do it, and then there's an opportunity to really bring people together. And as I said, especially if this is the first time these folks have been together, I think we want to be careful about putting anybody in an uncomfortable situation. So we do want this to be positive. So for example, just a couple of thought starters here, and I keep wanting to click on my PowerPoint. So some thought starters: have them share a strengths that my colleagues and our leader don't get a chance to see, right? So is there a strength there that I absolutely, but if I'm thinking about it, my colleagues and supervisors wouldn't agree, but I know it's a strength of mine. So I think that's a really great opportunity because it's an easy opening to share. But it's also that's where the team building things come, right? I say this, I actually really enjoy, I enjoy project management. I don't really get an opportunity to kind of do that at work, but I work with my local, my local charity, and I actually, manage all these big events and things like that. So it gives them an opportunity to share, and I help, and I think helps humanize people to each other, and just starts to, peel the lid off a little bit in terms of who everybody is. And again, it's set up from a positive place. The other thing too, because this can't all be about strengths, is, share an experience where I've overcome a development opportunity and how I've overcome it. So it's not just saying, hey, I really stink at this. It's historically, I've really struggled with this, and this is what I've done. So I think it's a safe opportunity to share development opportunities, but also there's things that everybody in that room can learn from that. So just a couple, and that's certainly, those aren't exhaustive, but the exercise itself is just to take this big list of things, filter it down to something that's meaningful to work on, and then we use the results of that to get some sharing in. And the idea of this is basically to take this list of 10, filter it down to 3. And there are going to be ties, and typically there are going to be ties. So we have down here, and it might be hard to see depending on how large your screen is, but if there's ties, identify, it's okay to just pick the competencies that you have most personal interest or you think are going to have the greatest influence on your career. That's also something that you can share. And I think really gives a unique insight into each individual in that room and some unique insight into how they fit within the organization. And I'm just looking down, and as I always think I'm going to be done this presentation in 10 minutes, and it also it always goes a little quicker than I think. This activity here is absolutely my favorite of the whole thing. As I said, all of these activities I think can be turned into a session into itself. I think this activity can actually be turned into multiple sessions. If we're doing it within the context of a 2-hour session, I think that we can essentially what we want to do is we want to take the 3 competencies that we've come up with and really help them think about what impact. So this is the what's in it for them. How will it impact your goals, team goals, and long-term strategy from a team perspective? As you can appreciate, if you're doing this team building and everybody is from the same team, hopefully you can see how you can turn those second 2 points, those team goals and long-term strategy, and build that into this. So you're actually contextualizing development opportunities within things that the team needs. This is my favorite exercise. My favorite part of this exercise by far is the opportunities piece. From a development perspective, whether it's the succession planning work we do or the leadership development part, opportunities are the engine of growth. Opportunities are the engine of talent. And I think that having people discuss opportunities and think of opportunities as a way to grow specific things is really, really cool. And I think if we're doing that as a group, there might be, Helen might share and getting people to, talk about an opportunities or a project at the organization that would help you develop something. Why is that cool? Why do you want to be a part of it? Talk about an opportunity that when you have multiple teams together, talk about kind of a need within your team that would be really great for developing conflict management or communication skills, and someone else in that room may be interested in that. So just having some dynamic dialogue around what opportunities are out there. From this exercise specifically, we think of opportunities from a demonstrated, practiced, and leveraged. And I always say every time I look at this, I always think maybe we should tweak it a little bit. This is in terms of level of how high the stakes are. And I always use it from a presentation perspective. So, if presentation skills are something that you're trying to develop, a demonstrated opportunity might be presenting in front of your own team, friendly group. A practice opportunity might be a client, but you've had them for so long, it would be pretty hard to lose them. And then the leveraged would be the most highest stakes opportunity where you actually get to go out to a client and present to them where there's really something on the line. So think of those opportunities and actually putting them in the context of a competency. Again, support. This is really good. And I think for those of you that have put some energy into some development resources within we have a lot of clients, they put a lot of effort into learning platforms and development opportunities, and they're always really frustrated when nobody knows about them. And I can understand that frustration. This is a really great opportunity to get people for you to communicate those resources and actually tie them into something versus this HR portal that's somewhere off in the corner. So support. And I think this is really cool from a team building discussion perspective. To have people, share a resource within the organization that you've used, or a mentor that's been really integral to you growing, or somebody that's really good at a certain skill or competency that's helped 10 people on your team that are really unique resource. So there's lots that you can do. And then finally, the demand piece. So this is what's really in it for you. So where's the demand at the organization, industry, or professional level? So as you can appreciate, and why I think it's easily the most important activity is there's just so much that you can do with this. If you're doing this within 2 hours, have them do it on their own, give them 5 minutes to go through this, come together and maybe just focus on opportunities or just focus on the support that's available. But when we talk about ongoing, we can sort of do this in an iterative approach, and maybe that's the first pass, and then we can come back together in a month and maybe focus specifically on one of those areas. So as I said, it's a great tool. As I said, it's part of our assessment, but the spirit of it, I think you can appreciate how that can fit into a lot of different things. And then finally, what we have them do, so they take all that information, filter it down to 3, then we get down to what competency are we going to focus on, and we have them do an action plan that's been really successful for us, just stop, start, and continue. And again, making this a positive experience, and so that there's a higher probability that people will actually share. A nice thought starter for them is, something that you're doing now that's helped develop a specific competency. So really low bar for sharing. We're putting people in a comfortable position, but also there's things that people can learn, and hopefully that generates some discussion. And I just see, a question here was, are the activity templates interactively designed so that they're drop-down menus or click boxes, or just click and select? So right now, basically we have those activities are all PDF. We are actually working on a fillable PDF version of them where they are dropped down. But again, they're so what we would have in each of those are so unique to individuals. The previous ones, because they're competency based and they're on those LSPs, are reasonable. But something like this wouldn't really be a good fit for a drop down. But we're always looking for opportunities to make this easier. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question. And I won't go into this. As I said, all of these things are more thought starters. And as I said, all of this is available in the more expanded and extended download with slides and everything that you'll get. So I won't go into too much of this. So these are just some more discussion starters. I'll just finish off with kind of what you want to do is, at the end of this, is if you are committed to the ongoing group development, is set the stage for it. So, at the end of that meeting, I would say that if you are committed that you're going to get together for every month for the next 3 or 4 months, get it in the calendar then. So just some things on a very basic level. At each meeting, kind of debrief the previous month, discuss progress, and then review and revise. So just, again, the idea of this at a high level, and as I said, in the downloadable guide will give you more ideas of that. But the spirit of this is, honestly, I think the single session can be really cool and really powerful. But these are things when you have meaningful touch points moving on, there's more that you can do. You can build on anything good that came from that. And over time, from a pure team building workshop, you're getting those same people together over and over again. They're going to be more comfortable with sharing. The discussions are going to be more candid and engaging. So setting up those touch points and making sure that you have them are arguably at least as important as what you're actually doing in the sessions, if that makes sense. And again, just a quick agenda for that ongoing development. And I'll talk a little bit. So as I said, and we'll send this around with the email. The guide is basically an extended version of the entire presentation. Specifically, you'll get more details for that ongoing development. And I didn't think that I would have time to go. That's why I took it out. And we certainly didn't have time to go through it. But you'll get some more information on that ongoing development piece. And that guide is a free download, so it doesn't cost you anything. And what we've tried to do, I think it really communicates our philosophy in let's make anybody that engages with us or trusts us with something like team building, succession planning, our goal is to make your life easier. So what you'll see in that resource, I think, is the culmination of that. You'll get your slides. We do a lot of the heavy lifting for you so that you can focus on getting the most out of the session yourself. And to that end, we also have some great resources around building great teams on our website. We'll identify links for you in the follow-up to this, and some lunch and learns around it as well. So anyway, lots of really great stuff around the team building exercise. Key piece, just to follow this up, and then I'll pass it back to Helen as we're running up against time here. If you have any questions about team building, assessments, anything, we are always happy to help. I think that sometimes folks are reluctant to reach out because they think it's going to turn into a sales call. If you go into our website and you see the amount of information that we have out there that's completely complimentary, that we allow you to download for free, I think that tells you a lot about what we are like to work with. We really believe in helping our clients, in helping helping manage the challenge that they have, and delivering some really cool and practical resources. So with that in mind, please feel free to reach out. Any feedback on this or otherwise, we are always happy to chat. And on that note, I will turn it over to Helen. And thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Glenn. So I'm just going to give you guys a minute to think if you have any questions you'd like to ask Glenn. And in the meantime, I will send you the link to that guide in the chat here, because Zoom actually doesn't allow us to attach things for you. So this is a little bit easier for you to just download the resources while you've got all your browsers open. And then, Glenn, I've got a question here for you. Can you give us an example of a client that you've helped with the team building process? What did the assessment and consultation look like if people were to, not just download this guide, it sounds like, but actually work with Sigma through the process?
Yeah, great question. So we do, and as I said, historically, it has been more about, oh my gosh, I have something, I have 25 people, in our head office next week, and I have no idea what to do. More and more people are very planful about what they want to get out of this. So, for example, with that leadership skills profile, you saw that there was a whole lot of competencies. It's 50 plus, and it's a lot. So the nice thing is I can think specifically of a client, and they had actually recently redone their competency model, and they wanted to both get team building and also really communicate what that model was. So what we did is we actually we call it benchmarking, but we basically made that report so that it was about 25 competencies, and it aligned with what they've determined was now going to be important for the organization moving forward. So we did a similar approach to what we're talking about today, but we refined it even more and just made sure that the competencies that were going to come out in that report were specific to what they were looking to do. So not only do that team building, but a very specific focus on a specific subset of competencies.
Thanks, Glenn. Okay, well, in the last 2 minutes, I'm going to remind you to please use the email to contact us if you want to have some more follow-up discussion around questions. And for those of you who are here to receive a professional development credit for SHRM or ATD, for SHRM, you will need a certificate of completion. So I'm going to launch a little poll here. You don't have to answer this if you don't want a certificate of completion or if you have no idea what I'm talking about. But for those of you who do want one, please just check yes so that I know to make a certificate, and I will send that to you sometime later today. And that wraps everything up for today. If you enjoyed what you saw here, then please do take a look at the other webinars that we have running this year. We've got one every month for the remainder of the year, and they cover a variety of topics. So leadership assessments, but also succession planning, as Glenn mentioned, talent development, leader character. I'll put the link in the chat for you all here so that you can access that. And again, like we said, you're always welcome to reach out to us if you have questions or if you're looking for a particular resource that you can't find. Very likely that we've developed something similar along the way, and we can work with you to get you what your team needs. So thank you for taking time for us today, and we hope that you have enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.